So the next thing that we want to do is we want to have Link be able to pick up the sword and then have an animation play. Link in the video game, he runs over the sword and then he picks it up, he lifts it up, he does that animation, he puts it up over his head, and then a sound plays, and then he returns to normal. We want to begin making this animation possible, and the first thing we're going to do to make this possible is we're actually going to create something called an actionable component. And this actionable component is going to be a bit complicated, but what it will allow us to do is to play animations and to have things happen in the game. It's going to follow the typical pattern that we usually use for components, with a component type and a component object in the constructor. Call the super for component type. And then the properties that it's going to have are this func and then this args. It's going to work similarly to how we're currently firing off events in the transition system. And we're going to make changes in both the game class and the screen file as well. Similarly to how we have this object here with type door, we're also going to have an object that has a type as well. And this type is going to be type. And this object now is going to have some different properties than the tile that's type door. So when we have an actionable tile, we're going to have a tile, and then some kind of event is going to change it. It may be Link walking over a space, or it may be Link placing down a bomb and the bomb exploding to reveal a secret door. So we're going to have a change in what the tile is. So the first thing we're going to display is the tile before the action, and then we need to think about the replacement tile, the tile that will come after the action. So let's go into our asset folder and see what the tiles are that I'm talking about. Let's go into shop. The first tile that I'm speaking about is this sword tile. So we're going to use this tile as the thing that Link will walk over to initiate an event. And then we can simply, after Link picks up the sword, the animation fires, we can just replace it with this black tile. And all we need to do now is specify what the name of these PNG files are in this object. So since the initial tile is the sword, we're going to use this as this is going to represent the sword. I'm going to write a comment down below just so it's clear, because both PNGs have the same number. So for act tile, the tile property is for the initial tile. The replacement tile, or let's call this tile 2 property, for the replacement tile. You could write out replacement tile, but I'm going to just use tile 2 because it's a short name, and I want to be able to keep this two-dimensional array looking kind of like how the screen should look. I don't want to make it out of proportion or make it look ugly, so I'm going to keep it like that. And now we're going to go to the index.js, and what we're going to do is we're going to handle this kind of type. So here we're handling if the type is a door. So let's handle else if type is equal to act tile. So now that we get in here, we need to know that we want to fire off the sword animation. And in our video game, we're going to have many kinds of actionable tiles. Unfortunately, this simple object isn't actually telling us which one of the actionable tiles we're dealing with. It tells us that it's an actionable tile, but we need to have some kind of way to know what one it is, right? So let's add a second type, and we can call this event type. And we'll just write sword -1. And in here, we can now set up our sword-1 animation. So let's get this event type, const event type from tile. And we're also going to need tile and tile2. And to avoid confusion, I will just call this tile1. There we go. And if event type is equal to sword1, do animation, create the actionable component. Good. Now remember, this whole block, this happens on initialization. So this is the first second that the game begins to show the shop level, this will be created. Now, before we get ahead of ourselves and create the actionable component, what I want to remember is that we need to show the tile1, but then after, and let me fix that typo, after the animation fires, we're going to be removing tile1 and showing tile2. So this is going to be directly affected by the path. So if I need to create, right? We need to create some kind of flag that will determine whether we go to the actionables path for tile1 or for the normal path of just tiles for tile2. So the last thing that we're going to have in this object is just, we'll call it remove, and we'll set it to false. It will be our remove flag. So let's pull this out. So if remove, we're going to set the path to one thing, and if not, we're going to set it to another thing. So if remove is true, then we will have just a normal tile. But if it's not true, then we will have actionable tiles. And we will set tile to tile1, while this will be set, or no, this will be set to tile2, and in actionable tile we'll be using tile1. And we can also move this in here, I believe, as well, because we only ever need this when we are showing the actionable tile anyway. So now that we got our foundation set up, we can move along and begin to create this animation component. However, we're not going to be able to get too far without actually creating the animation itself, but let's begin by just sketching out what the component is going to look like. So I'll make a comment. Now it's going to look like dummy actionable component, and it will follow the same pattern we've been using. And when it gets to value, it's going to be args, and it will be an array, or rather an object of arguments, while the function is going to be of type function. And this function is going to be the sword pickup animation function. And how we're going to use this is we're going to do event bus and essentially pass the args and the function. This is going to be done in the actionable system. That's how we're going to do this, right? Now, we need to sketch out what the function requires and therefore what the arguments will be. And with those things in mind, then we'll actually be able to build out this actionable system and incorporate it into both the game class as well as the registry class. So I know the game pretty well, and I know that this function, this animation, requires a few things. Now, I'm going to sketch this out in a file, and I think I'm going to add a file. Well, I could add it in here where we have link animation. And I'm going to do link pickup sword 1. And this is going to be a function. And I'll export it right off the bat. So a few of the things that we're going to need, I know for a fact that we are going to need Link himself. We're going to need Link as the player. So I can already pass that in. I know that this args is going to contain the player. And because this block of code is within the game class, we can easily put this player into this argument. That's very easy. Now, the next thing that I may need is, and I'll write this up here, I'm going to need the registry. Luckily, the player already has a copy of the registry. And we're going to need the registry because I have a feeling after we are done with the animation, we're going to want to add the tile that we no longer need to the entities to be killed property within the registry, and then we're going to get rid of that tile. So we have registry. That's good. The next thing I think that we will need is the handle user input function. And the reason why is because in that video game, when Link picks up the sword, he cannot move. He's frozen in place. Therefore, we need to put a pause on the user putting in commands so that way Link's animation is not interrupted. So we can add that in here. Handle user input. And again, that's going to be very easy because the game class has direct access to this function. And once the user freezes, he picks up the sword. We already talked about destroying the tile, and that actually brings me to something else that we need. We need the tile itself, so we need that actionable tile. And that will be a little bit tricky because the way we have set up our architecture, if you go here, you can see that the tile actually has not yet been created. And we don't have it until you come down here and the entity is already here. So with this problem, we are put into a bit of a weird situation. Now, what we could do is we could actually, if we go into system, I know we haven't created the actionable system yet, but if you just imagine, if we're using the transition system as an example, you can see right here that this is where we're actually creating the event and we're passing the arguments in. Now, we could easily just pass the ID, or excuse me, we could pass the entity into these args, but I actually don't like that solution because I would think that the best pattern would be one that we can maintain across time, and I don't want to get away from the pattern we've already set up. So I think a reasonable thing to do actually would be to incorporate the ID of the entity instead, because we can pass in this ID because we know what the ID of the entity will be up here. The entities that are being created from the registry create entity class, or from the create entity method, every time we fire this, the num of entities increments, if you remember. So what we can do is we could actually just go in here and say this registry num of entities, or whatever the name of that property is. Now, in the registry system, we do not yet have any way of getting an entity by an ID, but we can, and that's a very common thing to be able to do in the registry class. So registry get entity by ID. And how we can do this is we can take an ID, and we can also pass a system. Now, we could do this in a few different ways. We could have the registry go through every single system that it has to determine or to find the specific entity. But since we know that it's going to be in the actionable system, we can simply just do something like, and this is pseudocode, I'll write this out properly later. If system has ID, return, entity of ID, it's something like that. Now, that's not obviously the exact code again, but this is just pseudocode to help us remember. So, done in registry. So, cool. We have the ID. And because of that, we'll just get rid of actionable tile. Then we will have to think about the replacement tile as well. So we need to think about, once we get rid of this old tile, we have the animation file fire, and then we need to create the replacement tile and put it down. Where is it going to be? Well, we need to know the position that the tile is going to be at, right? So we're going to need to have new tile position component. And we can easily get this as well too, since it's actually just going to be the same tile, the same position as the old tile. So to do this, we can just do new tile position component. And we can just use the values we had used to make the dummy position component up here. Where is it? Or down here. There we go. And it's going to be pretty much the same exact thing. There we go. And the last thing we need to remember to add as well, we need to remember how the event bus works, and we want this to immediately fire upon any interaction, any overlap of the actionable tile and link. So we just need to add event time is equal to 0. This won't be used in this animation, but it's going to be used when we fire the event, or when we push the event into the event bus, I should say, and the event is then fired. The event will be fired up here. Just let me control find it. There we go. It'll be fired right here. So now what we will finally do is we're going to create the animation. To begin, go into the animations.js file where we have link pickup sword. And we can think about this linearly. We'll start with when Link walks over. The first frame that occurs is Link holding the sword. So we need to get the sword sprite. Let's go into the link.png, because even though I call it link.png, it has all of the items in it as well. And if we scroll down, we see the 4 swords are right here. We have this up sprite that we'll be using for the sword, and then we also have Link holding up the sword right here. So the first thing I want to do is I would like to actually create the sword entity, because we're going to have a position for the sprite as well as a sprite component for the entity, right? It's going to have a position and a sprite component. So let's get the sprite for this sword. So the first thing I'm going to do is const dummy sprite component is equal to name sprite and then value. And if you remember, takes an src, and within that src, it has 4 properties: x something, y something, height something, width something. So just judging from how far away the Link sword is, the very first sprite, we're pretty much at 0, 0, 0, x, 0, y. This is pretty far down. I mean, it's about 3 columns down, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 columns down, more or less. The columns aren't exactly spaced out uniformly, so we might need to play around with some of the values to see exactly where it is. So I think each sprite is about 20 pixels wide. So if we go 20, 40, 60, 20, 40, 60, we can go and use 60 as a starting value. We'll start with that to see. And since we're counting by 20, I don't believe it's going to be exactly uniform again, because if you can see, they don't line up properly. These animations with Link swinging his sword are a little bit longer in height than the width is. So we can use 20 and maybe just a little bit more. So why don't we do 25, 50, 75, 100, 125, 150, 175. Let's just start off with that to determine if that's correct. And this sprite, finally, this sprite looks a little longer than it is wide. So why don't we start off with 20 and 30 and 20, height 30, width 20. So that's the src rect. Now we need the path. So the path will be just simply link.png. Okay. Next, we're going to need a position component for this sword. Position component. And we can pretty much take the player's position and change it just by a little bit, because we're going to have it over Link's head. So we're going to have it over Link's head as he's holding it up right here. And he's also holding it with one arm. That arm is his right. It's to the left for us because we're looking at it from our perspective. But it's his right hand. So we can kind of use the player X. And, we could just subtract just a little bit. So why don't we just subtract 8? Again, I'm not sure if this is the exact value. And then for height, we can subtract a little bit as well, because, again, it's over his head. I think we could start off with maybe 40, because then let's set the height to about 40 and the width to 30, or rather, let's do 30 and 20, just like this down here. And from this, we can create the sword entity. So let's try that now. So let's do this player registry, because we have, again, we have access to the registry. Create entity, dummy position component, dummy sprite component. Let's go back to index.js. And actually we have a transition space. I want to test this. So in order to test it, why don't we set up our actionable system? So we can do class actionable system extends system. Follow the pattern, system type, super system type. This component requirements, it's going to be equal to actionable. And again, just like how we're doing in both the transition system and the render system, when we call update, we're going to loop through the entities that the system has to see if it intersects with the player at all. Player. So if player, and we'll wrap this in an if statement. Let's get the entity. So if, and why don't we just very simply, we can just copy this. I can even copy from the transition system because it's more similar. In the action space. And before we push it to the event bus, why don't we just do this and comment that out. And then why don't we try to fire this. And actually, I put it with this player. It's not this player, it's just player. So why don't we fire this, link pickup sword 1, and just pass in player for the moment. This isn't how we're going to end up doing it, but for right now, let's just leave it like this. And sword entity, go back into link pickup sword. Let's just console.log out the sword entity. Very good. Whew, okay, I hope I didn't lose you. I know we just went through some of that really quick. Take a moment, if you must, to pause it and kind of look at the files. After you're done doing that, make sure you export the actionable system. And we're going to go to our registry class. And currently we need to make sure that we're handling both the registry system and the action and the we need to make sure we're handling the actionable system as well as the actionable component. So const component object value. Just make sure I'm spelling that right. I am. New entity components actionable is equal to new actionable component name component object, and I need to import the actionable component. Go to the actionable.js file, make sure you export that, and then import it into registry.js. Okay. Woo, and then finally, go to index.js. Let's add this system to the initialization function, actionable system. And I just realized, let me double check. I don't want to get ahead of myself. I need to also add the actionable system to the add system function in registry.js. So actionable system, new system is equal to new actionable system, and we pass the system type. Make sure you write your break. Don't forget about the break. Now this should work. Just double check, make sure that it's the same string. Also, guys, real quick, I know I'm just writing out strings. I do that because I'm confident that I don't make many typing errors when I'm focusing. If you would like, you can also set these as constants and then just reuse them. That probably would be the best way to go if this was a production, like a game that was slated for a real production and distribution. But because this is just a video on YouTube, I'm not setting it as constants. Just a little advice if you guys do want to use this to build out games in the future, whether that's to continue building out this Legend of Zelda game or to use these techniques. Please use constants when you set the names of the systems and the components. can prevent bugs in the future. Anyway, aside from that, let's get the system, and we will get the actionable system, and we do update, and we pass this player. So, okay, we just did a lot. Take a breath again if you need it. But then when you're ready, let's go to the screen and let's test this out. Oh, it seems like we have an error. Let's see where it is. Can't get the sprite. Interesting. Let's go back.